Welcome to Dedicated. I'm your host, Doug Brunt. Today, I am thrilled to be with Jay McInerney. Not only has he been a towering figure in literature since his debut novel in 1984, Bright Lights, Big City, which was made into a 1988 film of the same name, but he's been a towering figure in ways beyond that. He's become a sort of cultural icon, especially here in New York, in a way that very few writers, especially these days, are. I can't name any writers for whom the Daily Mail and the New York Post are interested in their private lives. So, Jay, it's a pleasure to have you in here because we are interested in all this. So, thanks for coming in.
Not always a good thing, but
well, your drink choice, fittingly, is a bottle of Cristal, which I will get started on here.
Yeah, well, I just think it's always a good idea to start things with champagne.
That is a great philosophy for life. I think I gotta go with that mantra.
I just think the evening always go pretty well if you.
Is that the usual way? You know, if you go out to dinner, one glass of champagne to start things off.
That's that's almost my inevitable practice. Yeah.
And Cristal is the one.
Well, it's in recent years, Cristal has become such great champagne, and even better than ever. It's funny because Cristal used to be beloved of the hip hop community.
And I remember.
And then there was one of the president of Roederer apparently said something which was interpreted as he basically sort of said, well, we're not sure we welcome that clientele or something like that, something not very sensitive, and they kind of got boycotted by people like Jay-Z, who then started his own champagne. But honestly, it's a very good champagne.
I don't know if the audio crowd got the pop there.
That was a nice pop.
That
was very nice and crisp. Yeah,
That's
the other thing. It's the only wine that has a soundtrack.
That's it. It really is nice. I worry about pouring it down the soundboard and blowing things up a little bit, but. All right, well, that's also there. Speaking of the soundtrack.
Even now, it's making a little fizzing sound.
All right, that's just for starters. We got a whole bottle to go here.
Rice Krispies for adults.
Cheers.
All right, snap, crackle, pop. Yep, that's a good one.
So we were just alluding. It's been a while since we saw each other. I don't know. I'm amazed if you remember.
It was Bryant Park. Yeah,
I'm amazed because I'm a.
But if you ask me when, that would be harder because the pandemic just scrambled my sense of time. It
scrambles, the way I mark time too. But I remember I was out with a novel. You were out with Bright Precious Days, so it was 2016 was the year.
Wow, that was a while
Actually,
ago.
I did look that up. But yeah, so the audience knows Bryant Park is this beautiful outdoor park right behind the main branch of the public library on 42nd.
Doesn't seem that long ago, but
yeah.
But seriously, I feel like kind of 2.5 years got suspended somehow. You know? And social rituals were interrupted, and
only some come back, and new ones developed.
They don't all come back, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, maybe it allowed us to edit down some of them.
Yeah, well, people are only now starting to come back to the office a little bit.
Well, yeah, well, I know I don't go to as many galas as I used to.
So when I was doing some of the research on you, I was Googling around to find things, and you click on the images. You're in a bow tie in 90% of your photos out there at various galas and events and things like that.
Well, otherwise I'm hiding somewhere.
You're leading a good life. And I do want to talk about your cultural celebrity, but a little later, because I'm curious to get your thoughts on it, because I think there's really been a shift in what fascinates Americans in terms of cultural. If you go all the way back to the 60s, who's the it crowd in the 60s to now is very different. But
it's true.
Want to start at the beginning. So born in Connecticut?
I wasn't there very long.
Okay.
My dad was my dad worked for Scott Paper Company, and he was kind of a corporate gypsy, and he worked in marketing. And every year or two, we would move to a new place where he would tend to a new market. And so I think I was only in Connecticut for about 6 or 8 months.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So it was almost like a military thing moving around.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I wasn't a military brat, but I was a corporate brat.
Okay.
And
does that lead to time alone? Is new places, new friends? You got to get used to being alone a little bit.
I went to so many schools before I was, in junior high school, and it was disorienting because I was almost always the new kid in school, and then just as I would settle in, my dad would announce that we were going somewhere new. Including London,
That's great.
Vancouver. I lived briefly in Westchester, but even that wasn't for an entire school year. So, so I had to, I don't know. On the one hand, it made me into a reader because I spent a lot of time alone, and it also made me fairly adaptable because I had to be adaptable to be the new kid in class every year, every semester almost.
Yeah, this sounds like a little over therapization analysis, whatever, but I can see the kind of straight line between that and reading and writing for sure.
Yeah. Well, I did fall in love with books and literature and fiction and mythology fairly early on,
and then Williams College.
I went to Williams for 4 years actually,
and you must have known you were going to do some writing, because I think you went and got your master's in English at Syracuse directly after undergrad.
No, I actually went to Japan for 2 years just to for the hell of it, really. But I had a friend in Japan, in Tokyo, who told me that there were lots of English teaching jobs and that it was really fun, and so it was actually I initially went over on a fellowship from Princeton University, and that was my first year. And the second year,
so you were teaching English.
I stayed on to teach English
to English as a second language, Japanese high school kids.
To Japanese, mostly Japanese businessmen who had studied in high school, but it never really stuck. I mean, English is a very difficult language, particularly if your initial language is Japanese, and so it created a constant job market for people like me to go over there, and we could teach for 8 or 9 hours a week and live quite well. So I was there for a total of 2 years. I took up karate while I was there, and I don't know. I really sort of tried to immerse myself in the culture. I studied the language, and but then there came a point where I realized that what I really wanted to be was a writer, and being in Japan was not necessarily going to advance me in that way. That I was getting a little farther and farther from my own language, which is never good for a writer. And so after I did end up writing a book about that experience, which was my second novel. But I came back to New York in '79, I guess, and it was a really interesting period to come back to New York. The '80s were about to start, and I became part of them.
Yeah, you basically defined the decade with that.
We didn't really know it was the '80s at the time. It's interesting how decades acquire an identity and retroactively. And it's seldom. Things seldom start at the beginning and end in the nines, but. I didn't publish Bright Lights, Big City until 1984, and the 80s hadn't quite found their identity yet.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people took that book to be somehow emblematic of the period. And
right away?
Pretty quickly, pretty quickly. The word yuppie had just been invented, and I think it was a journalist named Bob Greene who first used the term, and that...
Is it young urban
professionals? Yeah. And so that tag was attached to me early and often. And I don't know. I didn't really think of myself as representing an era or a zeitgeist, but apparently everybody, a lot of other people did. And nobody really written about cocaine before. The downtown nightlife scene, and even though the book was partly about an aspiring writer in the literary and publishing world, it was also very much about what happened at night downtown below 14th Street, and that part of the book got sort of an inordinate amount of attention.
I love it. I want to get more into that in a second, because so when you got back, you went to Syracuse for a master's in English. You studied under Raymond Carver.
Yeah, well, the reason I went to Syracuse was because Raymond Carver was there, and also Tobias Wolff was a very good, very great short story writer. And I just thought, wow, why not study with these guys? And Carver at that time was probably one of the most influential writers in the country.
Yeah. He did the.
And it was a real
what we
privilege
think about
to
when we think about
what we talk about when
which
we talk
came
about
out
love.
in '81 or something like that, right? So he was probably with him.
I just started working with him when he published his second book, which was the one that really put him on the map, I guess. And I just found him, to be a very congenial soul.
So what does it mean to work with someone who becomes a mentor like that? Would you write a short story and then he would read it and talk with you about it? Or?
Well, there's two aspects. One is the writing workshop, where you bring your story in and to a group of fellow students who have presumably read it, or you read some part of it to them, and then they critique it. And that's sometimes helpful and often not, because, you've got a bunch of competitors in the room with you. But what I found especially useful was I would show the story to Carver, who would then mark it up and call me in to go over it. And he was very, very helpful in sort of questioning artistic choices. He would say things like, why did you use the word earth here when what you really meant was dirt? And he was good at deflating pretensions, and also he was famously a minimalist, and he certainly was good at getting one to prune back excess verbiage.
Yeah, I actually looked him up. The movement was dirty realism, I think. It's just, I don't know if that's a real thing, but that's what it says online.
He was tagged as being a dirty realist.
Dirty realism.
Also a minimalist, which, a lot of his early stories were very, very compressed, very pared down.
What an opportunity to be able to.
No, it was so great, and Tobias Wolff was a different kind of teacher, but he sort of filled in Carver was more of a trees guy, and Wolff was more of a forest guy. Looking at the big picture, and between them, I feel like I got a great education in writing. And while I was still at Syracuse, Bright Lights, Big City was published, and it's kind of interesting because suddenly I was going to classes, and then I was taking People's Express down to New York so I could be on the Today Show the next day.
Wait, so I thought you finished Syracuse. You took a job at the New Yorker as a fact checker or something like that, right?
No, I took it. The job at the New Yorker came after I got back from Japan, and I worked at the New Yorker as a fact checker for about a year.
Okay,
I was fired from the New Yorker. Which is part of kind of the subject matter of Bright Lights, Big City. So basically, in the course of I guess a year, my mother died, my wife left me, and I got fired from the New Yorker. So that was kind of the trifecta of bad things that can happen to you. And Gordon Lish, who was Carver's editor at the time and a sort of a famous writing teacher, said, the best thing that can happen to you is the worst thing that can happen to you. As best thing as a writer is the worst thing that can happen to you, so long as it doesn't kill you. And that year, it all happened to me. And so really, Bright Lights, Big City came out of that kind of
that
sense of devastation.
So then you went to Syracuse.
I went to Syracuse to because I'd basically been kicked out of New York, and I got fired from the New Yorker. My wife.
Why were you fired?
My wife who was a fashion model, left me, and for a photographer. I was fired because I was a bad fact checker. I was just, I can't say it was undeserved, but I wasn't that interested in fact checking. I wanted to write fiction. I wanted to be in the main pages of the magazine.
So you go from getting fired at the New Yorker to writing the novel. It's 1984. Bright Lights, Big City comes out. It's immediately a success. It's blurbed by Carver. I saw on the jacket. Did that come out only in paperback?
It did come out initially in paperback. And
I read somewhere your advance was like $7,500 or something.
It was
small.
That was my advance, and
amazing.
But the whole paperback thing was something I was upset about at the time. But my editor, Gary Fisketjon, who was at Random House, said, look, people who've published first novels, and they've sold 1,500 copies in hardcover and disappeared. And he said, let's see if we can reach a much larger audience in the initial run. And it, it must have worked because, within a year, the book had sold 200,000 or 300,000 copies, and they just kept reprinting and reprinting and reprinting. Yeah. And, there was half the price that hardcover would have been, thereby reaching some of the younger readers that maybe wouldn't have bought a hardcover. I mean, that was the thinking. I always was sort of irritated that I didn't get my hardcover publication, but the book was such a success that I don't think I really had to.
Normally when a book comes out, everyone stacks in their Today Show appearance, and all that stuff is in sort of week one, and you push to make the list. You must have had this drawn out thing.
Oh,
where
it was very drawn out.
Come to the Today Show. We want to talk to you.
Yeah, it was very drawn out because at first there was no promotion budget or anything. Yeah. I remember I did a reading with Carver at the Three Lives bookstore in Greenwich Village, which is still there. I'm happy to report. And then the Village Voice had their own bestseller list, and they started having Bright Lights Big City move up their bestseller list.
Oh, it's been fun to watch the slow build.
Yeah, it was very, very, and it was kind of a word of mouth thing. And then the problem was that about a month after it was published, it sold out completely of the first printing, and at that time it took 5 or 6 weeks to reprint a book. So it could have easily disappeared in that period, but instead the demand sort of built, and the word of mouth remained strong. And
then you get the '88 movie. Did that raise things to another level, or you're already?
Yeah, well, yes and no, but I think everybody.
If people haven't seen the movie, it's Michael J. Fox. It's a star-studded cast. Who else is in there?
Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah. The woman lead was a big name too. I can't remember the actress.
Oh, well, there was Tracy Pollan. There was, who else? It was, the movie was a hit, but I think it didn't have the impact that the book did. And I wrote the screenplay, so I can insult it if I want to. But there was another thing that happened, which is by 1988. The climate had changed somewhat, and Nancy Reagan was promoting her "Just Say No" to drugs policy, and things had just gotten a little darker, and everybody's view of the downtown party scene had sort of curdled a little bit. And so it wasn't
the Wall Street expense budgets,
and I think that honestly, the filmmakers, by whom I mean the producers and the director, I think they were afraid of glorifying hedonism and drugs a little bit. They were a little bit too afraid of that, and so which took some of the fun out of. I mean, I think one of the things that works about Bright Lights Big City, if it works, is, it's funny and fun, and it's also dark and serious, and the two are kind of held in balance. I mean, the protagonist's wife leaves him, his mother dies, he loses his job, but meantime, he's running around downtown, having a lot of funny observations, and being very self-deprecating and self-critical. I somehow don't think we really caught that balance in the movie, and I think it was just more dark than anything else. And also, Michael J. Fox was such a big star at that time, and I think Michael's audience was primarily made up of people who watched, was it Family Ties?
Alex Keaton.
Alex Keaton, and they didn't really want to see him with the straw up his nose. Yeah, and my fans, who were not quite as numerous, they didn't want to see Alex Keaton in the role of the protagonist of Bright Lights Big City. So it was a little bit of a mismatch,
But you did have your fans, of course, and you were a big star. So I wanted to ask you your thoughts on the cultural celebrity thing. I just finished reading this book about Joan Didion and Eve Babbitt, and the author of the book.
Yeah, like both of them.
Yeah, they're great writers, and this book is sort of analyzing the history of the two of them. The book, I think, is coming out in a few weeks, actually.
Yeah.
And the author, do you know Lily Analik is the writer?
Lily Analik, yes.
She's a terrific writer, by the way.
Yeah, Lily. I think Lily was partly, if not largely, responsible for kind of resurrecting the reputation of Eve Babbitt, who was a terrific writer, but kind of stopped writing, and she kind of went into an eclipse for a while, and partly because of a terrible injury she had.
Fire accident.
Yeah,
a lot of drugs and all sorts of...
Well, she dropped a cigarette, I believe, on her skirt, which was some kind of synthetic, and it
just went up.
It caused terrible injuries, and so she kind of went into hiding, and but Lily sort of resurrected her to a certain extent, and I think that's wonderful because she
has a follow-up book to the book you're talking about, which is about Didion and Babowitz and their relationship a little bit. But she makes the observation in the book that in the 60s, the real fascination was for the American public was the writers and the rock stars. They were doing the drugs and they were the it crowd, and even Hollywood wasn't really, because they had to be up early for the set, so they couldn't be doing the drugs, not partying late. Like, they were kind of the squares, really the people we liked.
Except for Dennis Hopper.
Except for Dennis Hopper. He was at the party pretty late night, I think. But then in the 70s and 80s, it kind of morphed away from the writers, and Hollywood did become sort of the it crowd. You seem to be more of like a holdover to how it was interpreted in the 60s. Like, we talked about Amor, as great a writer as Amor told us, nobody gives a crap where he eats dinner and what he's drinking and stuff. Like, there are almost no writers that matter in terms of our fascination as a celebrity, the way it was in the 60s with Joan Didion and other writers. But you're sort of capturing that a little bit. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a variety of reasons, and sociology can be very boring, but I think somehow myself and Bret Easton Ellis, maybe Tama Janowitz to a certain extent, were the last writers who had a kind of cultural impact the way that Norman Mailer and Truman Capote and Gore Vidal did, where we appeared on TV and we appeared in the gossip columns, and even people who didn't read our books knew who we were. Mm-hmm. And, certainly, social media has changed that now. I mean, as you say, Amor tells her, like, Page Six doesn't write about Jonathan Franzen. I don't know why, but they don't. And we just we were sort of the last gasp, I think, of that kind of literary celebrity that's not very common anymore.
I don't see it. I'm going to start wearing the Tom Wolfe white suit, but I don't think that'll get anyone's attention either. I'll just get mocked. But so speaking of the gossip,
the trouble with Wolfe is you can't wear white suits anymore because everybody accuses you of imitating Wolfe.
Right. He owned it. You'll have to wear a purple suit, maybe. Speaking of your gossip column, celebrity somehow it continues on. So just recently, you and I were briefly talking about this before we got started, but you had a terrible fall. This is back earlier in February of 24, maybe something like
that. This was December of 23.
Okay.
So I apparently, I say apparently because I lost consciousness, but apparently I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and as sometimes has happened to me before, I fainted. But unfortunately, I must have hit something very hard or very sharp, because when I woke up in the morning, there was blood everywhere in my apartment. I mean, it was all over the place. I must have wandered around or something, and I had to bribe my cleaning lady and assure her that I hadn't murdered anyone.
It's a great opening for a novel. Yeah, it's like how that.
It was so crazy though. I woke up and I eventually discovered there was a big gash in the back of my head, and then eventually I finally told him. It must have been three or 4 days later before I called up my general practitioner, and I said,
"You walked around for 3 or 4 days like that?"
Yeah.
Jesus.
And I think by that time I was sort of aware enough to sort of say to him, "I guess this is a little strange that I just called you." And he said, "No, actually," he said, "obviously you had a concussion." And he said, "People behave very strangely after they get a concussion." So I started getting these CAT scans, and the last one that I got, I went home and I got ready to go out to dinner at Roscioli downtown. Just not easy to get into, and
one of the hot spots.
And the hospital called me and they said, "You got to get here right away." And I said, "I got a dinner reservation. I'm not going to." He said, "No, right now." And I said, "No." Anyway, I finally obeyed orders and went up to the hospital. And
well, I love this because this is sort of when the Daily Mail and the New York Post kick in to sort of cover Jay and his hospital experience, because you do it in typical McInerney fashion, which is to smuggle in champagne to the hospital and wave in Michelin star dinners that are like coming in. The doctors are like, "This is nuts. You can't."
Yeah, they were kind of upset. I brought a bottle of Krug into the hospital with me.
It reminded me of that scene in the movie Arthur with Dudley Moore when, Hobson is ill and has to go in the hospital, and he's calling up the restaurant like, tell Andre it's from me, and that doctor's like, he shouldn't be doing this. And he's like, I don't want his last meal to be Jell-O.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. They were trying very hard to get me to behave, and I was trying to carry on as if nothing was wrong, which obviously it was. But I had a wonderful neurosurgeon, and his name is Terry Schwartz, and he's actually just published a memoir about what it's like to be a brain surgeon. It's quite, it's very cool.
Too bad, this didn't happen before the memoir came out, because he could have done a whole chapter on patients drinking champagne before the surgery.
But I guess I was under for about 4.5 or 5 hours.
Oh my God. So what, they were repairing torn blood vessels, or what was going on?
Drilled, apparently he drilled 2 holes in my head and went in.
Wow.
And I saw him this summer in the Hamptons, and I said, what exactly did you... But there's a little dent up here. I said, what do you do? And he said, we kind of put some epoxy in to cover it up.
Wow.
And
you're fine now. You're biking, walking around.
There's a sequel to this, which is that I felt short of breath, and I went to a cardiologist who told me that he gave me a stress test, and he said, you need stents. So I went into Mount Sinai to get stents. And the doctor who was supposed to do it said, you're too far gone. You're 85% blocked in your arteries. And so the next day I had to have open heart surgery.
Oh, my God.
For 6 hours. And it was crazy. I just spent 7 days in New York Hospital, and then I spent another 11 days after my heart surgery, and I have to say, up until this point, I've been very, despite a lifestyle that sometimes pushes the extremes, I've been very healthy, and
doing exercise, as we were saying, exercise workouts over FaceTime,
I work out almost every day, and I think that helped in my recovery though, because when I started cruising around the ICU unit, I noticed that everybody else looked half dead.
That's motivating.
Yeah, well, I did recover pretty well, and I feel good now. It's I'm back to flying, eating, and drinking.
There we go. Well, on that note, I'm going to top up a little bit with champagne.
But it was a very, very weird year for me. I have to say.
Well, on to better things. So now we're like into the better part of 24, coming into 25.
Oh, well, the immediate sequel to the brain surgery story is that I got home, and after 2 or 3 days, the novel that I had been unable to face for 2 or 3 months, I finished it in a week of working 8-10-hour days, which sort of made me think the surgeon had done something really good up there.
Put a chip in there.
I know. He added a chip. And I was really very happy with the results.
What's do you have a pub date yet on that?
Maybe I'll know more tomorrow, because I'm having dinner with my editor tomorrow.
Okay.
But I have a title.
Let's hear it.
Which is "See You on the Other Side."
All right.
So the title,
"See You on the Other Side."
Yeah. The title actually comes from a sign that I saw posted in a diner in Brooklyn in the immediate aftermath of the restaurant closings, and in March of 2020. And this slapdash sign went up. See You on the Other Side. Back when we all thought it would be like a week or two before.
Did that restaurant survive? Did we see it on the other side?
Apparently it did.
Oh,
yes.
Good.
But think about it. We all thought it was going to last for a little while, and so the novel actually starts during the pandemic.
Okay.
And when I was rereading the first draft, and I came across that little sign that I had noted, I thought, there's a title.
Yeah, that is a great one.
Sometimes the best ones are just waiting to be found.
Oh, I've told some title stories of my own on this show before, so I won't bore the audience. But I've named half my books. Well, there are only 4, but I've named 2 out of 4, and then the other two have come from either my editor or Jonathan Karp, actually named the last one. So he knows what he's doing.
He's a good editor.
So this is a good way to get into process.
Yeah.
I usually do a quick section on process with writers, and I wanted to start with second person. So I think most people listening, like first person, third person, and you say, or you could do the second person and be like, what the heck is that? And so for the audience, it is a thing. If you look it up, not only it's not common, but it is a thing. And if you look it up, not only is it there, but you, Jay McInerney, are credited with really pioneering this in Bright Light's big city. So can you talk about the technique and the purpose for the technique, at least in your work?
Well, when I wrote the first few lines of Bright Light's Big City, which remained unchanged in the final book, I actually had a long and somewhat dispiriting night at a nightclub in downtown somewhere. I'm trying to think of what it might have been The World, I think. Anyway, I finally got back home, close to dawn, and I remember just before I left the nightclub, I looked in the mirror and I said to myself, "You're not the kind of guy who'd be at a place like this at this time of the morning, but here you are." And when I got home, I wrote those lines down, and I realized at the time that, that is the form that interior monologues usually take. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't look at the mirror and say, "I idiot." You say, "You idiot." And many months later, I found that piece of paper with those lines on it, and I thought there might be something there. And so I very quickly wrote a short story, which was pretty much the first chapter of the book, and sent it off to the Paris Review. And the story came out to some, it definitely created some interest and commotion. And but my editor at the time, when I told him I was working on a novel, I suddenly decided this could be a novel. He said, "Well, I certainly hope you're not writing in the second person." And I was about halfway through it at that time. And I said to myself, damn, maybe you can't do this. Maybe you can't write a novel in the second person. So I went back and I tried the first person, I tried the third person, but something drained out of the narrative. It wasn't as funny. It wasn't as self-conscious. We should make note of the fact that the protagonist is high on cocaine when he says these words. So, but somehow, I think for a short comic novel, it works very well. Yeah. And if I had done it in the first or third person, we might not be here talking today.
Yeah. I mean, it does have that sort of crackling energy off the page, and as you say, it's like you're talking to yourself in the mirror. It captures that. That
was what I actually did, and that was what I realized later is that this is the way that most of us have an interior monologue is in the second person, and I don't know. It must have worked because a lot of people, and some people don't know they're reading something in the second person, which is even better.
It just feels so natural. Yeah, it feels very smooth and natural.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, do you outline or do you just sort of get right to it?
I don't really outline. I wish I could. I know people who. Scott Fitzgerald outlined. Bret Easton Ellis outlines. Lots of people map out their books before they sit down to write them. But for me, it's just like, as E.L. Doctorow said, it's like driving at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can go all the way across country that way. You just a little bit at a time.
I have not heard that. I went to one of his book. It was Andrew's Brain. I think it was the last book of his, last book party. He died shortly after that, but I met him once. I love his writing. Ragtime, I think, is one of the all-time.
Ragtime is amazing. Yeah. That was one of the. When I first came to New York, that was one of the books that was really making us all talk about it.
Yeah. How about editing? Do you edit as you go, or is it sprint to the finish?
I try to get the first draft down before I. But as it turns out, a lot of times you when you don't quite know where to go, you go back. And rewrite, and but I do rewrite a lot. I think there are a few writers who are sort of proud of the fact that they just get it all down at once, but I certainly don't. And in the case of this book that Knopf is going to publish soon, I wrote 3 drafts myself before I handed it in, and I will probably have to do a little editing in the next few months. But I always show it to my agent, and in this case, I showed it to my previous editor, who's now retired, and then I went back, and then I let it sit for a while, and I went back.
I've gotten to like that process a little more. In the beginning, I think this was just a way to rationalize my laziness or something. But, I'd write the first draft, and someone would say, but this, and I'd be like, it's like a painting. I put the tree there and a bus there, and you could move the bus over there, but that's not what happened. This is the painting, this is the art, and that's what I want to hand in. But the truth is, it can be better, and you need to do many revisions, and you can make it better. And sometimes there shouldn't be a bus at all, or whatever. But and when I can feel it getting better, I actually have come to enjoy the editing process more than I used to.
Yeah, well, I think Carver said to me, "There's no such thing as writing. There's only rewriting." And he would always just try and rip through a draft, and then he would go back and he would revise and revise and revise.
Yeah. How about paint the picture of you writing? Is there a favorite spot? Are you drinking coffee? Would you write at night and drink wine? Or
it's funny. I used to, when I lived in the city full time, I used to borrow people's houses in the country. And James Salter, I borrowed his house. George Plimpton's house. I would have to get away from the city because my life here was a little chaotic, to say the least, and so I would isolate myself for like a couple of months at a time, and then I would wake up early in the morning, and I would pretty much work all day. Now I find
in the 80s, in the heyday, would you ever write on cocaine? Would that ever happen?
I tried that, and no. I tried it once or twice, and it just...
Then you read it the next day, like, my God,
it doesn't work. Yeah. You want to get on the phone. You want to have sex. You don't want to write. It was so weird. I met Truman Capote shortly before he died, and he was telling me that he discovered the magic elixir of writing, and that it was cocaine. And I thought, no, it's not.
No, I've tried that.
Even I knew that, and I hadn't published a book yet. But that was his tool of seduction. Was he tried to get me? He took me into George Plimpton's office and told me he had some cocaine, and he had designs on me.
How did you exit the office? Quickly, I guess.
I did his cocaine, and then I left quickly. He wasn't very fast. I mean, it was. We shouldn't laugh because he had a pretty sad ending in terms of alcohol and cocaine, and he was a mess. He really was. I mean, when I met him, he was a mess already, and he died probably 5 or 6 months later.
It sounds like he would not have survived the Me Too period.
Oh my God! No.
Yeah. So how about switching gears? Although that we could spend some more time on Truman Capote, maybe we'll round back. But staying on process a bit longer. How about early readers? When you finish that first draft, do you send it to your wife or editor, or is there anyone else?
I sent it to my wife, my editor Gary Fisketjon has always been part of my process. Donna Tartt is often.
Yeah, she's great.
An early reader of mine.
By the way, I never see her do media. I'd love to have her on the show, but I never see her do media at all.
She avoids it like the plague.
Yeah.
But she's a wonderful writer, and
she's great.
She's been a good friend over the years. I mean, she started out a little later than me, because it always takes her about 8 or 9 years to write a book. The first one was The Secret History, which was definitely worth waiting for.
Yeah,
but I have my early read, and my agent Binky Urban always reads my books.
Well, not many people can count someone like Donna Tartt among their early readers. That's it's quite a favor to get another writer to have a look. That's cool.
Well, it's the last novel. Certainly, she was very helpful with an early reading of the first or second draft.
When you become a star, I mean, let's be honest, you are a star. does it change the relationship with the editor at all? Like, I could imagine either someone can get full of themselves and say, well, I don't need to hear from them, or the editor can say, I feel a little nervous about giving Jay a dump of edits because he's a star.
I feel like it should, but it didn't in my case. My editor still treated me with a certain disdain. No, actually, it didn't change my relationship with Gary, because we'd gone to college together and we'd traveled across the country together in a beat-up Volkswagen, and so we'd already been through a lot by the time I handed him the draft, the first draft of Bright Lights, Big City. That never really seemed to come between us. I mean, it changes the rest of the world around you for sure. I mean, I feel like, about 6 months after I published Bright Lights, I stopped having a normal life for quite a while. And,
Is that when the gallows first kicked in, or it was just more like, I don't know, somehow the partying went to another level? Or
well, it's just people. It's just you could feel when you walked into a room that everybody changed. Everybody,
which again doesn't happen. I think you name the most talented, successful writer today, they could walk in a room and nobody would know. No one would know. But you in the 80s and even through to present day, you go in and there's there's Jay McInerney.
Yeah.
Like you're someone people, especially here in these New York City restaurants, people know.
Streets, yeah.
Yeah.
But luckily in New York, most people are pretty cool, and they don't in general, one doesn't get bothered as much as one might. And
And I'm sure.
I see the looks.
Sure it's pleasant. They're
I
in,
see
they're
the
out.
looks,
Love
and I see the nudges. But not a lot of overt harassment.
Yeah. Well, you're also. Like, I feel it up well too, because you look the same across the decades. Like someone would from a photo from the '80s, you can say there's Jay Matt. Not everyone can hold up as well over the years.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But I feel bad for. Movie stars, and I mean, let's face it,
you give up your privacy.
I mean, the idea of just stepping out in the street and having paparazzi waiting for you.
I think the paparazzi thing is getting better, though, because everyone's got a camera and a video camera in their phone, in their pocket. And so the photos are fairly easy to come by these days. Anyone can be paparazzi, and therefore no one is, in a way,
Well, it's true. But, when I've lived in the same apartment now for 18, 19 years, and Alec Baldwin has lived across the street from me, and man, there was a period when it was just like,
well, he handles it so poorly too.
You couldn't walk, you couldn't walk in our block without seeing somebody hiding behind a bush and somebody else hiding behind a telephone pole.
I think if he just he could diffuse it. Or he gives them what they want. He explodes and like, this is amazing. This is gold. Let's come back tomorrow and we'll trigger him once more. We had this weird, I'll tell you a funny story. This is a bit of a tangent, but this is advice I got from Richie Sambora, who has handled his fair share of paparazzi. We're on vacation once, and my wife is a journalist and at times has been the target of paparazzi. And we're on vacation, and so we're out in the water in Hawaii, and this guy swims out. He's like, hey, I know you're here with your wife and your young son. This was years ago, so our kids were little, and we were swimming in the water. He's like, there's a guy on the beach taking pictures of you guys. And I was on edge at the time because we had been under the microscope a little bit, and I went to like 60 miles an hour immediately. I'm like, honey, you go that way. I'm going to go get this guy. So I swim in, and I'm like, hey, you taking pictures of my wife and kid? He's like, what? And there's this giant, there's a 1.5 foot long lens on his camera in his lab. I'm like, obviously he was. So he stood up and he's like, hey, I'm just taking pictures, man. And he said, I had all these words and I was blocking the camera. It was almost like our friend from 100 yards away thought we were dancing, because I was blocking the camera as he was trying to take pictures of them getting out of the water. And then so my wife and son got away, and I started leaving. He goes, that's it. I'm on you guys all week. I'm going to make your life hell. I'm all over you. I'm like, oh man, this is that's not the ending I was looking for.
No.
And we ended up meeting Richie Sambora at a bar, like a restaurant that night, and I told him the story. He's like, you handled it all wrong. He's like, what you do is you go say, hey man, I know you got a job. We're going to in 5 minutes we're going to walk down this way. You make us look good. I'll get you great pictures. Let's all part friends and it'll all be good. And he's like, you got to have some outreach and it's all a game, and they're just trying to, pay their bills too. So I tried that later. And it worked like a charm.
Yeah.
I'm like, Richie Sambora is the wisest man I know.
No, he's right.
So if Alec Baldwin would just do that instead of punching them, he'd just say, look, try not to make me look fat. I'm just going to walk here, get your photos, and then we'll all move on.
Yeah.
You can send them into your bureau, and I'll go have my
his
day.
reputation precedes him. I was actually at I was with some out-of-towners at Marjarel, the restaurant in the 60s, and Alec and his wife were across the room from me, and I saw that she was drinking the house wine by the glass, and I had brought some of my own wine, so I sent her over a glass because I knew she would appreciate it. And so Baldwin comes storming over.
Oh, my God.
He starts yelling at me, and the out-of-towners are everybody in the room is freaking out.
Why? What?
Well, I've known him for years, so it was all a joke. But
he was joking.
But he was playing off this reputation of being a hothead, and it's pretty funny.
That's funny.
He scared everybody in the restaurant. All
right, he is naturally funny when he does the SNL stuff. He's funny, but
Norman Mailer once said something really interesting. We were walking, we were at some movie premiere, and we were walking to wherever Peggy Siegel had the meal afterwards, and these paparazzi were following, or they were running ahead of us and taking pictures, and Norman turned to me and he said, "Be careful, Jay. Those flash bulbs will eventually bleach your soul." And I thought, wow, that's that's pretty heavy. But yeah, it's like
I love that he can pull out those kind of lines in normal conversation. That's awesome.
Yeah, but I think it's true that you don't want to seek it out. On the other hand, I feel bad for people who really. I mean, there was a time in my life when I had paparazzi problems, and particularly when I was dating Marla Hansen, who was very, very well known at the time as a model whose face was slashed by her landlord, and who was on the cover of the New York Post many, many times over. And we had to come and go from places separately, or else we would be relentlessly pursued and photographed.
What do you think he meant by bleach your soul? I mean, that you could eventually get to the point where you'll miss it when it's gone?
Eventually come to the place, where you're just pure image and you don't have an interior left. But
I mean, you could miss it when it's gone. You could get to that place. I suppose we all might.
Yeah. Well, I think some people do too. This sort of Norman Desmond complex.
This thing that drove you crazy. Suddenly you're like, wait, where is it now?
Yeah, where? Yeah. Why are they not taking my picture anymore?
So you wrote the screenplay for Bright Lights. Mm-hmm. What are the different and now But happy birthday, by the way, to Bright Lights Big City. Turns 40 this year.
Any moment. I think.
Oh yeah, what was actual pub day?
Well, somebody wrote a piece in Airmail and said it was August 8th, but I think it was in the fall sometime, and my editor does too.
So 40-ish.
But honestly, at the time, it wasn't like we suddenly, had a big party to celebrate the public. The book came out, and they gave me a copy. Maybe 3 weeks before it was in the bookstores, and. I guess you would call pub day whenever it showed up in the bookstores, and on the one hand it was very exciting, but on the other hand there was, at the time we had very low expectations and we had low budget, and
it'd be a more level playing field if every writer had to go with a soft launch like that. Let's just see if the book finds an audience. There is no Today Show option for you. There's no big marketing budget. We're just going to put them out there and people will decide.
Yeah, it was about 6 months before I was on the Today Show.
Is that right? 6 months after it had generated that much buzz. Who was hosted the Today Show in '84?
Oh God, who was it? Diane Sawyer, maybe.
Sawyer, was she over on? Who knows?
No, wait.
God, no, we'd have to look it up. But it was definitely before Matt and Katie, right?
Before Matt and Katie, I think. Yes, it was definitely before Matt and Katie. And yes, and of course, that regime is now long gone.
Oh my God, yeah. And it's all going away. The money for those roles is all going away. Hoda left. The ratings are down. The salaries are down. People are jumping ship. To that question though, so you wrote the screenplay for Bright Lights. And over your career, you've done short story, novel. You do a lot of nonfiction, particularly around wine and reviewing wine. How do you view the different kinds of writing? In particular, the screenplay versus novel.
Well, I don't. I try to take the screenplays seriously, but at the same time, I realize they're just blueprints for something for another product. You know, they're not a finished product. You know, I mean, somebody once
That's
said...
a good point. I've never really thought about it that way. The screenplay is just like, here's a map to like the movie you're going to make.
The director will then make into a movie.
Yeah.
You know, somebody once said to me, "Writing a screenplay is kind of like hosting a party, isn't it?" I said, "No, it's like catering a party. You don't even get to take a bow, really. You know, I mean,
right?
That's what it is. You're the caterer, you know, and if you're lucky, people like the food, and they remember some of it, and but the host of the party is the director. You know, he's the guy who really, or she is the woman who really creates, you know, a possible work of art. And I've done I've done a fair number of screenplays. The only ones, you know, only a few have been produced, which is the way it goes, I guess. Bright Lights, Big City. I wrote this screenplay for an HBO. The very first HBO feature was called Gia, and I wrote that. And it was Angelina Jolie's first big role. And well, you know, it was like, let's see, 80s, drugs, AIDS, let's call Jay McInerney. You know, it's like,
right in his wheelhouse.
Yeah. And so I met with the guys at HBO, and they had never been in production before. HBO had previously, and prior to 1988, 89, whenever this was, they had been a place where you rented old... Yeah,
where the box office movies would then show. I just saw a documentary about the making of The Sopranos, which is sort of a watershed moment for HBO as well. It's like that kind of original programming was not something they had really done before much, you know.
Gia was the first one. And I said to them, you know, after doing...
It was the very first one they did?
Yeah, very first one.
Wow.
And I said to them after doing a fair amount of research, I said, well, you know, I got to tell you, I'm going to write the best screenplay I can. But I said, it's all going to be about the casting. I said, you've got to get the right woman, and because this is all about charisma. And sure enough, Angelina Jolie was amazing in this production. She was very, very good, and she won an Emmy for that because it wasn't considered a feature film. I think she won the Emmy.
Those categories are also confusing. Yeah, you know, it's like what? It's basically something on film.
I was proud of that, and then I did one part of an anthology series for David Lynch, and the series was called The Hotel Room, and it was basically 4 different stories set in a hotel room in the 20s, the 30s, the 60s and the 80s, and Barry Gifford wrote 2 of them, and I wrote one that was set in the 80s, had Griffin Dunn and some other people in it, and that was really interesting and fun. But only a few of, as I said, my screenplays have made it onto screen. I
mean, and so you've got the novel that you are finishing now and coming out. How about short stories? We ever just sit down in the Hamptons pad and write a short story over a couple of days?
I love short stories. I mean, and I take them very seriously. I like to think my next one will be a collection of short stories. Yeah. Once you know.
Are you doing anything with airmail? There's so many people are contributing.
I've written for it a couple of times. Yeah.
But wine stuff or short story, fiction or nonfiction?
Book reviews.
Book reviews. Okay. Yeah. Braden Carter seems to be doing well with that.
Well, it's fun to read. Yeah. I mean, there seems to be a whole new model of advertising where there's a sponsor every week or something. It's Ralph Lauren or whatever. Yeah. I assume it's successful because I heard it's sort of up for sale now. You know,
okay. Private equity type.
People are willing to throw money at it now, so it must be doing well.
Well, before we get into the lightning round, I wanted to ask you, especially talking about the 40th anniversary of Bright Lights. Aside from the obvious, like ebooks and things like that, but what are some of the big changes you've seen in the publishing world? And we'll fortify ourselves here as well with some champagne. But you've kind of had a front row to this for decades, and you can kind of mark time by the publication of Bright Lights. What are some of the? I know a couple things that I have seen to start the ball a little bit. But you mentioned Bright Lights almost ran out of books, and now there's rapid printing, so you can they do smaller print runs because they can print faster and things like that. And ebooks are a thing too, but there also seems to be a slightly different vibe around publishing in terms of the martini lunch and
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it's I mean, there have been people Me Too'd out of publishing, frankly, some of whom I know. I'm waiting to see what the editing process is with this book. I worry a little bit about the sort of wokeness of publishing at this moment, just because I mean, it's not worth mentioning who, but someone who read an early draft of this book said, you say these things that you can't really say anymore. And I said, what do you mean? And this character in my novel goes to a gynecologist who's her old gynecologist has died, and the new one is a woman. And so this woman in my novel thinks to herself, well, thank God she's Jewish at least. In other words, one wants to have a Jewish doctor. Mm-hmm. And my friend said, you can't say that anymore. That's just not, your editors won't let you say that. And well, I didn't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I hope it's not true, but
right. It's we're all inventing characters. All these characters exist, right?
I as I say, I haven't been through the editing process on this current book, but I think it's less frequent that a book becomes a cultural event. I'm trying to think of what the last. Yeah, I mean, I remember when The World According to Garp was published. That was a pretty big deal. Or Bright Light's Big City. Or
when was Garp? Around the same time, or a little before?
No,
I guess, right?
It was
late 70s,
mid 70s, I think.
Yeah, okay. I had a whole John Irving phase where I was just obsessed with John Irving.
Well, he's a very good writer. But I just don't know how. It seems like not so frequently that a book crosses over into the popular consciousness if it starts out as a literary endeavor,
Mm-hmm.
To
your point in the editing, if they're going to dial back things, they're going to press buttons. It's certainly not going to cross over to be an important book if all that stuff's going to get weeded out of there.
Yeah, well, as I say, I'm hoping that that's exaggerated. But one wonders, for instance, I mean, could a book like American Psycho be published now? I'm not sure that it could be. It may offend too many people in the publishing world.
So before we go to lightning round, one final question of speaking of the Truman Capote thing, is there anyone back from that your early days, late 70s, 80s, who was like the most wild man, wild woman? Eve Babbitt's, of course, was fairly wild. Who was just sort of the wildest out there?
That's easy. Hunter Thompson. I mean,
did you ever have a night out with him?
I had a couple of nights out with Hunter, yeah, and it almost killed me. But yeah, Hunter was the wildest badass that there was, and but between the drinking and the cocaine and
psychedelics as well, right?
And psychedelic, yeah. I mean, he just did everything, and unfortunately, it was not a happy ending.
He didn't offer you cocaine in the back room.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah,
and he
actually we were
was
both
he interested in you as well.
We were not
that way.
Hunter's totally straight,
okay.
But he was totally straight. But Hunter, we were both being inducted into the Library Lions pantheon about 1987 or so, and Hunter, I just happened to go back to the men's room, which was very far from the dining room. When Hunter was there, and he just had this hockey puck size container like full of cocaine, and he just
here you go
offered it to me, and it was obviously really strong because I remember we got our picture taken like half an hour later, and I'm just trying to compose my face in such a way that it's not going to be entirely obvious that I'm just wired out of my brains,
So how is some people they have that long pinky fingernail. How did he have a straw? What would he do? How does it go out from the container into the nose?
He had like a silver spoon around his neck.
That he wore around his neck.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Easy access.
Go Hunter.
Good for him. Great writer.
Yeah.
He wrote on cocaine.
He wrote some wonderful things. I think he wrote on everything. I mean, Hunter, I think, is kind of the exception that proves the rule that, generally speaking, writing on alcohol, writing on drugs is not very productive. And
you're impaired. You are literally impaired.
Yeah. But Hunter seems to have done it.
Yeah.
But I don't recommend it.
All right, so the lightning round.
Lightning round, okay.
Your favorite book as a kid?
Call of the Wild by Jack London.
That's an awesome book.
Well, if you go
How old were you when you read that?
About 12, 10,
oh,
12.
You were counting.
Yeah, I loved Jack London, and I loved stories of, trappers and wilderness and all that. But that was very powerful.
And if you go back, what was the other thing you were going to say?
Oh, I like the Hardy Boys, too.
Yeah. Book or books you're reading now?
I just finished in the car on the way up here a really good novel called Dream City by a guy that I know named Douglas Unger. I haven't seen him in 30 years, but he teaches, I think, in Nevada. And the Dream City is about the rise and fall and rise of Las Vegas, and it's really well done. I mean, Las Vegas is a good subject. It's a big subject, and he really
gets into the gangster element from the early days.
Nails it, yeah. And
is it fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction, yeah. It's a novel. Okay. Yeah, and the other book I just finished was what's her name? Taffy Brodesser. She wrote Fleischman in Trouble, and her new book is called Long Island Compromise. Okay. I mean, I can't believe anybody's really named Taffy, but anyway, that's how she built herself. And Long Island Compromise is her latest.
All right,
latest
I would check out both of those.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Least attended book event ever?
Oh, mine?
Yours. Yeah.
Oh dear, these are terrible stories to tell. But the worst one I remember was in Buckhead in Atlanta, basically Georgia, and it was at a Barnes and Noble down there. It was this huge Barnes and Noble. And
what year is this? Is this for Bright Lights early on? Or
no, there was no tour for Bright Lights, but so this would have been later, maybe Brightness Falls, but yeah, and so I went down, and they'd put out about 80 chairs, and there were like, eventually there were 3 people, but 2 had clearly come to see me, and one guy just sort of wandered in, off the street, as it were, and thought he'd see what was going on. But yeah, 2 people, and that was, I mean, this was a period when I was appearing in People magazine and so on, but no, it was a terrible feeling, because you don't know. Well, do you have to do something for the 2 people who were there, but you feel like an idiot reading to an empty room.
Yeah, that one you and I did together at Bryant Park. That's a weird one to do because
it's you don't know if people are there for you.
Crowd. Yeah. It's this beautiful park. But we did it at lunchtime. It's a beautiful day. So, someone shows up with a salad and chomps a salad for 20 minutes, then they're off, and another guy comes along with his salad.
That was a little weird, I know.
Yeah, but it's beautiful, and it's a lot of fun. You were so gracious, too.
Sometimes you want to kill your publisher, I mean, there are times.
So it was great for me. I got to hang out with Jay McInerney and do a book event. But, all right, Hollywood actor with the most style. And this could be, at any point in history, male or woman.
Cary Grant. Yeah. I mean, Gregory Peck was a close second, but Cary Grant was. I mean, I used to watch those movies, rewatch those movies sometimes just to see how he was dressed. I mean, the guy is so elegant, just amazing, just incredible.
It's funny, the style these days. I don't know. The NFL guys have a certain style. They're sort of wandering around. Half the time I look at them like, what the hell are they doing? Who's coming up with the ideas of this?
Yeah, I'm
not a classic style.
No, I'm still closer to the Cary Grant style than to the NFL style.
Yeah.
or the hip hop style.
Best glass of wine you've ever had, and meaning the whole moment, not necessarily just the wine in the glass. Although that's part of it.
Well, the whole moment, I think, would be on my first real date, when I took a girl named Joan Coughlin to a restaurant called, believe it or not, the Log Cabin in Berkshire, in Lenox, Massachusetts. And they actually, even though I was only 17 at the time, they actually brought me a bottle of wine, which was Lancers. Do you know what? It's like a rosé. It's a Portuguese rosé that was very popular back in the 70s, which this was. And the fact that a waiter came and opened this bottle of wine for me and poured it, had me taste, and the fact that I was across from this woman who was sort of my first love and drinking this, what I thought was absolutely wonderful wine at the time. I think it would be hard to top that. In a way.
That's a great story. I love that. It's like becoming a man there.
I mean, if it was just in the glass, I would have to say that 34 Romanée Conti. But
by the way, are you still doing some wine? You were the wine critic for the Wall Street Journal for a period.
I'm technically the wine critic for Town and Country magazine.
Town and Country,
okay. I've done a lot of stuff for them, and will again. But I love. I don't know. It's just using a whole different set of muscles when you try to think about wine, write about wine, as opposed to fiction.
Got to conjure some feelings there. Well, along those lines, if you could design for us, so I mean, you obviously know your wines and your foods and your restaurants. If you could design the best 3-course meal with wine pairing.
Okay. Well, let's see. 3-course meal. All right. Well, you have to start with caviar and champagne. So there's a start. And then I would say oysters and Chablis, preferably Chablis by Ravenel. And then, believe it or not, I would say a roast chicken with red Burgundy. That's one of the greatest pairings of all time. And I, my wife sometimes makes fun of me when I order roast chicken in a restaurant, but I think it's a great test of a restaurant if they can really make. A roast chicken can be almost a perfect food, and for some reason, red Burgundy just goes better with it than anything else. And red Burgundy's my favorite wine category of all.
Which is basically a Pinot, right?
Yes, Pinot. Pinot.
Okay. On restaurants, you were talking about some of your dinner plans coming up. Can you name a couple restaurants in New York City that you especially love at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I always love Le Bernardin, where my friend Eric Ripert presides. And Cesar Ramirez, who for many years ran Brooklyn Fare, in dispute with his last backers. He now has his own restaurant called Cesar, which just opened this summer in Soho. Mm-hmm. And I love both of those places. A restaurant called Claude in the East Village, very very wine centric, but very informal. In fact, it's so informal they don't have any backs on their chairs, which kind of pisses me off. But
yeah, you need that.
I've had discussions with them.
It's an important part of the chair.
No, but it's a great it's a great casual restaurant, and they open an upstairs seafood bar called Penny, also very good, and they actually put backs on the chairs, which the manager claims they did for me, although of course I know that's not true.
So now you travel quite a bit as well. So in 2024, how does New York dining stack up against London, Paris, LA?
Well, New York is it's hard to beat New York. I mean, the San Francisco area is the only area that can compete, but that's kind of if you include Napa and Sonoma and so on. I mean, in terms of Michelin-starred restaurants, San Francisco is right up there with New York. But I think New York is the greatest place to eat because we have the best ethnic food. We have great Chinese, we have great Thai, we have great. I mean, more and more of the Japanese food here is so good. I lived in Japan for 2 years, and the sushi in New York is just amazing. For some reason, we don't seem to do Mexican that well, but New York is a wonderful place to eat. And there's something like 7,000 or 8,000 restaurants in the greater metropolitan area.
How many nights out do you eat a month?
If I'm in the city, I eat out every night.
Somewhere nice.
I've only cooked in my apartment 3 times in the last 17 years.
You're kidding me.
No,
3 times in 17
I like
years.
I like to cook, but I cook more in the country than I do.
How do you know?
Well, I have this kitchen equipment which I never use, but it's just like, how can you eat at home in the city when there's so many places to explore? I mean, I'm sure when you come into the city, you don't.
No, well, yeah, cook. I'm out. Yeah, I don't have a kitchen here, so. Polo Bar is as we mentioned, Polo Bar is sort of my main spot to go to in Midtown, and I haven't actually branched out there much because I'm in the city for dinner once or twice a month. So usually there.
Yeah, well, think about Le Bernardin though; it's very close to here, and you can eat at the bar. I mean, people think of Le Bernardin as this really elaborate tasting menu experience, which it is, but you also can go sit in the lounge, and you can have 1 course or 2 courses or 3 courses, and glass of champagne, glass of Chablis.
Oh, this all sounds great.
Some oysters.
All right, we need to make some dinner plans soon.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Oh, no, sorry. Second to last question. My notes got scrambled here. You mentioned Bret Easton Ellis earlier. You and he really kind of captured the New York scene. Who's the writer who has best captured the L.A. scene, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Eve Babbitt's earlier, and I would say that she is definitely right up there, with anybody. Also, frankly, I mean, Bret Easton Ellis has written very convincingly about L.A. Most particularly in his latest book, which is called The Shards. But yeah, I think Lillian Nulick was correct about Eve being kind of the quintessential L.A. girl.
L.A. writer. Yeah. All right. And then last question, truly the last one, for Jay McInerney, one piece of advice for the audience.
One piece of advice for the audience. Well, I would say start the night with champagne, and good things will happen to you afterwards.
I love that. Jay, thank you. What a pleasure.
Hey, thanks, Doug. It's great to be here.